Julian Vance sat in the quiet mahogany-lined boardroom of Summit Investment Group, his hands resting flat on the polished table. His face was a mask of absolute calm, a professional armor he had spent 25 years perfecting in the financial industry. Outside, the high-arched windows, a steady autumn rain beat against the glass, matching the somber mood inside the room. Across the room, the projector screen displayed his quarterly market volatility analysis for Oak Ridge Capital. It was a project that had consumed his life for the past 4 months, requiring 60-hour work weeks and countless late nights. Now, his work was covered in aggressive red circles and warning labels. Cynthia Gable, his ambitious colleague who had joined the company 3 years after him, stood next to the screen. She was clicking through her presentation slides with practiced, theatrical grace. She spoke with a tone of deep professional concern, her voice echoing off the mahogany walls. She explained to the board of 9 senior executives, including Director Lawrence Pierce, that Julian's models contained fundamental deviations from traditional financial forecasting principles. She showed side-by-side comparisons where Julian's visualizations differed completely from standard industry models. Julian remained motionless, observing the performance. He felt a sharp sting of betrayal, but he did not let it show. He watched as Cynthia pointed to his custom charts, arguing that the volatility patterns he presented completely misrepresented actual market conditions. When compared to standard indicators, she claimed, the inconsistencies were glaring and dangerous. Director Lawrence Pierce removed his reading glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose in obvious frustration. He asked Cynthia if she was completely certain of her analysis. Cynthia replied without a moment of hesitation, claiming she had verified the numbers using standard methodologies and that the discrepancies were substantial and deeply concerning. Julian watched as she advanced to the next slide, which showcased a highly complex visualization he had designed after weeks of testing. Cynthia argued that Julian's model employed unconventional mathematics that generated projections completely out of alignment with peer-reviewed financial principles. The chief executive officer crossed his arms, his frown deepening. Julian could feel his promotion prospects evaporating with every nod of agreement around the table. Cynthia explained that if Julian's model had been applied retroactively, it would have missed a major market correction, potentially costing clients millions of dollars. Director Lawrence Pierce shook his head in disappointment. Cynthia then assured the board that she had already begun implementing standard models to fix the situation, before presenting to Oak Ridge Capital the following week. She made it clear that she should take over the Oak Ridge Capital account and receive the senior analyst promotion they were both trying to secure. The executive meeting lasted for 90 minutes, during which Julian's reputation was thoroughly picked apart. Finally, Director Lawrence Pierce turned to Julian, asking if he had any response to the allegations. Julian took a slow, deep breath, remaining calm and composed. He met Cynthia's eyes and asked a single question that broke the room's silence. He asked if Cynthia could explain why Oak Ridge Capital had explicitly requested this exact nonlinear visualization approach in their initial project brief. Cynthia's confident smile faltered. She claimed she was unaware of any such request and asserted that the client expected standard analysis. Julian reached into his leather briefcase, pulled out a thick document, and slid copies across the table to the board. He pointed out page 17 of the project brief, which detailed Oak Ridge Capital's specific requirements for nonlinear volatility tracking. Julian explained that what Cynthia perceived as mathematical errors were actually custom pattern recognition innovations requested by Oak Ridge Capital's research division. The chief executive officer began reading the document, his interest clearly piqued. Julian added that Oak Ridge Capital's quantitative team had spent 3 years researching these exact patterns. Director Lawrence Pierce asked if this was accurate, and Julian confirmed that Dr. Raymond Sinclair, Oak Ridge Capital's head of research, could verify every detail. Julian asked Cynthia if she had informed Oak Ridge Capital that she had replaced their requested proprietary approach with the traditional models they had explicitly rejected. Cynthia tried to speak, but Director Pierce raised a hand to demand silence. Her composed face showed the first flickers of panic as the board began reviewing the client brief. Julian sat back, his voice quiet but steady, explaining how the custom algorithm was designed to identify market anomalies that traditional systems missed entirely. He noted that their proprietary approach was the primary reason Summit Investment Group had won the account in the first place. The executives exchanged looks of surprise as they realized Cynthia had spent 90 minutes trying to dismantle the very work the client had demanded. Director Lawrence Pierce closed the folder slowly, his eyes shifting from Julian to Cynthia. He announced that the meeting would be adjourned until they could verify the client requirements directly. As the executives filed out, Cynthia glared at Julian, her face pale with anger. Julian simply gathered his documents, refusing to engage in her silent hostility. He walked out of the room with a sense of quiet vindication, knowing that the battle had only just begun. The boardroom had become a theater of deception, but he had successfully rewritten the final act, turning Cynthia's moment of triumph into a lesson in preparation and accuracy. He knew that the following days would be challenging, but he was fully prepared to defend the integrity of his analytical work and his position within the firm, relying on facts and documented requirements rather than political maneuvering or corporate posturing. To understand how Julian Vance found himself in this high-stakes boardroom confrontation, one had to look back at his 6 years of service at Summit Investment Group. Julian was a man who believed in the quiet power of numbers. He had built a reputation as an exceptionally detailed and meticulous analyst, preferring to let his work speak for itself. He would arrive at the office at 7 o'clock in the morning, booting up his computer and running initial simulations during the quiet hours before the hallways filled with noise. In his quiet office, he often reviewed his father's old blueprints, learning early in life that a bridge, much like a financial model, must be designed to withstand extreme, unexpected structural forces rather than just average loads. He had grown up watching his father, a dedicated and brilliant civil engineer, repeatedly passed over for promotions because he lacked the political polish and loud self-promotion of his colleagues. Julian had vowed early in his career that he would succeed on merit alone, refuse to engage in office politics, and focus entirely on delivering outstanding results for his clients. Cynthia Gable, who joined the firm 3 years after Julian, was the complete opposite. From her first day, she focused on visibility, building relationships with senior leadership, and attending every industry networking event. While Julian spent his evenings running simulations and perfecting data visualizations, Cynthia was having lunch with executives and pitching herself for leadership roles. She loved to boast about her high-level corporate connections in the company cafeteria. She would often spend her afternoons laughing loudly at Director Pierce's jokes in the main lobby, while Julian silently observed her behavior from the glass elevator. Despite their contrasting styles, they had developed a cooperative working relationship. When Director Lawrence Pierce assigned both of them to the prestigious Oak Ridge Capital account, Julian welcomed the partnership. The account was worth millions in annual fees, and the analyst who successfully led it would be promoted to senior analyst with a significant raise. During their initial client meeting, Dr. Raymond Sinclair, the head of research at Oak Ridge Capital, made it clear that traditional forecasting models were no longer sufficient. He explained that standard financial indicators had repeatedly failed to predict recent market shifts, causing significant losses for their portfolio. Dr. Sinclair wanted an unconventional model that could identify nonlinear volatility patterns, which was exactly the area Julian had been researching for years. Julian shared his ideas, explaining that standard linear models were designed in a different era and could not handle modern algorithmic trading volatility. Dr. Sinclair was immediately impressed, requesting that Julian lead the analytical development. Cynthia, sensing the opportunity, offered to manage client communications while Julian focused on building the models. She admitted she was less familiar with advanced mathematical modeling and preferred to handle presentation logistics. Julian agreed, believing they were supporting each other as team members. For 4 months, Julian poured his energy into creating custom visualization tools and testing algorithms against historical data. He spent long nights at his computer, analyzing millions of data points to ensure the robustness of the forecasting algorithm. His proprietary model achieved 58% accuracy in predicting major market corrections, a significant improvement over the 41% accuracy of traditional methods. Believing they were a collaborative team, Julian shared his progress and mathematical formulas with Cynthia, explaining his methods in detail. He had no idea that Cynthia was secretly presenting a different narrative to director Lawrence Pierce, claiming that Julian was veering into dangerous and unverified territory. She carefully set the stage for her boardroom ambush, hoping to position herself as the responsible leader who saved the account. The morning after the disastrous boardroom presentation, a second meeting was called at 9 o'clock, this time with Dr. Raymond Sinclair present. The atmosphere in the conference room was ice cold. Dr. Sinclair did not hide his displeasure. He placed his tablet on the table and looked directly at Director Lawrence Pierce, expressing his concern over a standard projection report he had received from Cynthia the previous day. Dr. Sinclair emphasized that traditional models were exactly what Oak Ridge Capital had hired Summit to avoid. He confirmed that the nonlinear volatility tracking was a strict requirement of the contract. Director Pierce was stunned. He looked at Cynthia, whose face had drained of color, and then at Julian. Dr. Sinclair stated that Julian's custom methodology was the sole reason they had chosen Summit Investment Group. With the client's direct confirmation, Cynthia's deception was laid bare. Director Pierce apologized to Julian for his lack of oversight and announced that Julian would take over the account as senior analyst immediately. Cynthia was dismissed from the meeting, her career at Summit in ruins. She was reassigned to internal research with no client contact. Julian had won the promotion, but the experience left him with a deep sense of caution. He realized that technical competence was not enough. He had to protect his work from those who would steal it, knowing that professional betrayal could come from the most unexpected sources. He spent the remainder of the afternoon moving his files to secure directories, ensuring that all access permissions were strictly restricted to authorized team members and resolving to monitor his professional environment more closely than ever before. He knew that Cynthia was a formidable opponent who would not accept defeat lightly, and he needed to be vigilant in the weeks ahead to protect his new position and his hard-earned reputation. 3 weeks after his promotion, Julian Vance began to notice subtle but troubling disruptions in his work. It started with minor technical issues. A critical spreadsheet containing proprietary formulas would suddenly show missing data, or calendar invitations for client meetings would mysteriously vanish. Julian initially dismissed these as software glitches, but the incidents became more frequent and targeted. A vital presentation deck he had prepared for Oak Ridge Capital was altered overnight, with key slides rearranged and several database queries corrupted. When he checked the system logs, he found that the changes had been made using an administrative account, leaving no clear digital trail. Julian discovered that a script file containing core parameters for the quantitative model had been altered. A critical variable representing the decay rate had been changed from its calculated mathematical value to a hard-coded constant, which caused the model's forecasting predictions to skew artificially during testing. Julian spent a sleepless night, staying awake until 2 o'clock in the morning, using file comparison software to locate the exact line of code that had been modified. He realized that someone was actively trying to sabotage his position. To secure his intellectual assets, Julian purchased an external encrypted solid-state drive with his own personal funds, keeping the drive in his coat pocket at all times. He also wrote a background script that monitored his files and sent immediate alerts to his personal email address if any folder structure was modified. He took immediate precautions, saving duplicate copies of all his analytical models on a secure personal drive and triple-checking every report before sending it to clients. Julian felt a sharp pain of disappointment as he realized Cynthia was willing to destroy their years of cooperation for a quick executive promotion. Despite his vigilance, the pressure was exhausting. His colleague, Terrence, a risk analyst, pulled him aside in the break room one afternoon to offer a warning. Terrence revealed that Cynthia, though reassigned to internal research, had been meeting frequently with the assistant of director Lawrence Pierce. She had also been seen having lunch with several members of the board of directors, whispering about Julian's unconventional methods and alleging that his models were unstable. Terrence mentioned that he had seen Cynthia copying folders to a portable storage drive late in the evening, claiming she was retrieving personal documents. Julian understood that Cynthia was attempting to rebuild her reputation by undermining his credibility. Her campaign of silent sabotage took a more dangerous turn when Julian's access to the primary market database was suddenly revoked. IT support claimed they had received an email authorization from leadership to modify his permissions. It took Julian several hours of administrative arguments to restore his access, forcing him to delay a scheduled deliverable for Dr. Raymond Sinclair. It was the third delay in a 2-week period. When Julian finally sent the analysis, Dr. Sinclair called him directly, his tone filled with professional concern. He explained that Oak Ridge Capital valued his models, but the constant operational delays were becoming a risk for their fund. Dr. Sinclair then shared a piece of news that made Julian's blood run cold. He revealed that Pinnacle Advisory, Summit's fiercest competitor, had recently approached Oak Ridge Capital with a detailed proposal. They claimed they had hired a specialist who could implement Julian's exact nonlinear volatility forecasting model at a lower cost and with greater efficiency. Julian thanked Dr. Sinclair for the information, maintaining his composure, but his mind was racing. He knew that the only person who could claim to be a specialist in his proprietary model was Cynthia. That evening, Julian searched the internet for any news regarding Pinnacle Advisory. He found a press release issued 2 days prior, announcing that Cynthia Gable had been hired as their new director of strategic forecasting. The press release described her as a visionary expert in nonlinear market forecasting, boasting of her ability to implement advanced visualization systems. Julian realized Cynthia had not just been trying to sabotage him. She had been preparing to steal the entire Oak Ridge Capital account. She had spent months studying his methods, copying his mathematical formulas, and downloading his presentation templates. She had packaged Julian's years of research as her own intellectual property, using it to secure a high-paying executive role at a competitor. Without immediate action, Pinnacle Advisory would use his own creations to steal the client that had built his career. Julian sat at his desk late into the night, staring at the screen. He realized that playing defensively was no longer an option. If he went to Director Pierce or the legal department, they would likely demand a long and bureaucratic internal investigation that would take months, by which time Oak Ridge Capital would already have moved their funds to Pinnacle Advisory. Julian needed a decisive strategy. He needed to turn his technical work into a legal shield and weapon, exposing Cynthia's theft in a manner that would leave no room for denial. He began reviewing the security logs and compiled the exact files Cynthia had accessed during their collaboration, preparing to fight back using a method she would never expect. He was determined to protect his career and the integrity of his research from being exploited by a competitor, knowing that his response had to be swift, calculated, and legally airtight. He spent hours drafting a detailed timeline of every interaction, file transfer, and communication, preparing a comprehensive dossier that would form the basis of his counter-strategy. Julian knew that in the corporate world, accusations without legal teeth were easily ignored. He needed to transform his technical grievance into an ironclad legal action. The following day, he met with Thomas Fletcher, a senior partner at Summit Investment Group's retained legal counsel. Thomas was an experienced corporate litigator who understood intellectual property disputes. Julian met him in his office overlooking the city, where the walls were lined with heavy law volumes and documents. Julian presented him with the evidence he had gathered. Comparative system logs showing Cynthia downloading massive data files, code repositories, and visualization templates just days before she resigned. Julian also showed the competitor's press release and the upcoming conference program. Thomas listened intently, nodding as he reviewed the documents. He explained that Julian's custom software code, data structures, and unique visualization layouts were protected under United States copyright law. Under Title 17 of the United States Code, Section 106, the copyright owner held exclusive rights to reproduce, distribute, and display the work. Furthermore, the mathematical models and predictive algorithms qualified as proprietary trade secrets under the Defend Trade Secrets Act, codified under Section 1836 of Title 18 of the United States Code. Thomas explained that copyright protection is powerful because it safeguards the specific expression of an idea, including the unique layout of the charts, the precise formatting of the data output, and the custom code, which prevented a competitor from claiming they developed it independently. He was concerned that Pinnacle Advisory might attempt to file a countersuit or claim prior development. But both men fully agreed that the forensic logs showing Cynthia's database downloads were irrefutable proof. Thomas Fletcher's assistant prepared 3 sets of bound documents, each wrapped in a blue legal backer, which were signed and stamped by the clerk of the district court. Julian held one of these documents in his hands, feeling the physical weight of his legal protection. Thomas explained that because Julian had created these models as a work made for hire, Summit Investment Group owned the rights. But they could file a federal lawsuit on Julian's behalf. To establish their claim, they immediately prepared an expedited registration filing with the United States Copyright Office, submitting the source code printouts while redacting certain proprietary formulas to protect their trading secrets. Julian then met with Director Lawrence Pierce and the executive board to present the legal strategy. Initially, the board was hesitant, fearing a public legal battle might damage their reputation. The chief financial officer asked detailed questions about the potential costs and duration of a federal lawsuit. However, Julian displayed a slide showing the cost of losing the Oak Ridge Capital account, which represented 25% of Summit's annual revenue. He explained that if Pinnacle Advisory successfully poached Oak Ridge Capital using Summit's own technology, the firm would lose its most prestigious account and suffer a massive drop in valuation. The board agreed to proceed, authorizing Thomas Fletcher to file a civil complaint in federal district court for copyright infringement and trade secret misappropriation. The legal team's immediate goal was to secure a temporary restraining order and a preliminary injunction under Section 502 of the Copyright Act. This order would legally prevent Cynthia Gable and Pinnacle Advisory from presenting, using, or distributing the proprietary models. The timing of the conference was critical. Cynthia was scheduled to give a keynote presentation at the National Asset Management Summit at the Meridian Hotel in 4 weeks. Her session, titled Next Generation Volatility Models, was the centerpiece of Pinnacle Advisory's marketing campaign. Julian and Thomas knew that serving the lawsuit in private would allow Pinnacle Advisory to quietly settle or delay the proceedings while still holding on to the client. To ensure maximum impact, they decided to serve the federal injunction at the conference itself. Thomas filed the complaint under seal in the United States District Court, presenting the evidence of Cynthia's unauthorized file downloads and the direct comparison of her proposed presentation slides with Julian's copyrighted designs. The federal district judge, recognizing the clear evidence of copyright infringement and the threat of irreparable harm to Summit, signed the temporary restraining order. The order explicitly enjoined Cynthia Gable, Pinnacle Advisory, and the conference organizers from displaying, sharing, or discussing the proprietary models. Julian coordinated with the legal team and a certified process server named Donald Miller, a retired sheriff's deputy, to execute the plan. They also sent a formal copy of the federal order to the conference organizers, advising them that allowing Cynthia to present the copyrighted materials would place the conference in direct violation of a federal injunction, exposing them to contributory copyright infringement liability. The conference board, wishing to avoid legal jeopardy, agreed to cooperate with Summit's legal team, arranging for their IT department to monitor the situation. Julian felt a quiet sense of control as the conference approached. He had spent years relying on the system to recognize his hard work, only to be betrayed. Now he was using the federal legal system as a precise instrument of justice, ensuring that Cynthia's attempt to steal his career would be stopped by the power of the law. He knew that the corporate landscape was ruthless, but he had prepared a shield that no amount of political influence or polished rhetoric could penetrate. He felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, confident that the law was firmly on his side. The morning of the National Asset Management Summit at the Meridian Hotel arrived with a clear, crisp sky. Julian Vance walked through the grand lobby, his expression calm and focused. The main presentation hall, with its gold-leaf ceilings and brilliant stage lighting, was packed with hundreds of senior executives from the country's leading investment firms, including Dr. Raymond Sinclair and his team from Oak Ridge Capital. Julian chose a seat near the back of the hall, blending into the crowd of professionals, surrounded by the quiet hum of conversation. On the stage, Cynthia Gable stood behind the podium, looking confident and immaculate in a tailored suit. She was introduced by Pinnacle Advisory's president, who bragged about hiring the industry's best talent to dominate the quantitative forecasting sector. Cynthia smiled warmly, thanking the audience before launching into her keynote address. She began presenting the nonlinear forecasting models, using slides that featured Julian's exact visualizations, simply updated with Pinnacle Advisory's branding. She confidently claimed that her proprietary system achieved 56% accuracy in predicting market corrections, compared to a mere 40% for standard traditional models. Julian watched in silence, waiting for the precise moment of maximum impact. As Cynthia reached the technical core of her presentation, explaining the complex mathematical formulas she claimed to have developed, a certified federal process server, Donald Miller, walked calmly onto the stage. He approached the podium and handed Cynthia a folder containing the federal lawsuit and the signed temporary restraining order. Cynthia froze, her voice trailing off in confusion as she glanced at the documents. She tried to make a brief joke about an autograph, but the room remained silent. Simultaneously, the conference IT department, acting under the direct threat of legal liability outlined in the court order, deactivated Cynthia's presentation. The slides of Julian's stolen models disappeared from the massive projection screen. In their place, the IT team displayed a high-resolution copy of the federal court temporary restraining order. The text on the screen clearly stated that Cynthia Gable, Pinnacle Advisory, and the conference organizers were enjoined by federal law from presenting or displaying the copyrighted analytical models and proprietary trade secrets of Summit Investment Group. Citing Title 17, Section 106, and Title 18, Section 1836 of the United States Code. A wave of whispers swept through the massive hall. Attendees leaned forward, squinting to read the legal notice on the screen. Cynthia stood frozen at the podium, her carefully cultivated professional facade shattering in an instant. Her face went pale as she realized that her theft had been exposed to the entire industry. The Pinnacle Advisory executives in the front row stared in disbelief, scrambling to contact their legal team. They realized that the reputation of their entire firm was now severely damaged because of Cynthia's intellectual property theft. Dr. Raymond Sinclair shook his head in disgust, immediately understanding the nature of Cynthia's deception. The conference coordinator stepped onto the stage, politely announcing that the session was adjourned due to legal conflicts. As the crowd began to file out of the hall, discussing the unprecedented scandal, Julian remained seated for a moment, experiencing a quiet sense of closure. He watched the Pinnacle Advisory team arguing in the hallway, their voices raised in panic. Julian then walked down the aisle to meet Dr. Sinclair, who greeted him with a firm handshake. Dr. Sinclair expressed his deep appreciation for Julian's integrity and confirmed that Oak Ridge Capital would be expanding its relationship with Summit Investment Group, ensuring that all their analytical needs would be managed directly by Julian. He noted that Oak Ridge Capital had no interest in doing business with a competitor that condoned the theft of proprietary software code, and they were pleased to see that Summit had taken such decisive legal action to protect its assets. They agreed to have lunch at a quiet restaurant nearby to finalize the contract details. 4 days later, Pinnacle Advisory issued a brief statement announcing that Cynthia Gable was no longer employed by the firm. The public exposure of her intellectual property theft made her entirely unemployable in the financial sector, effectively ending her career. Summit Investment Group's board of directors, recognizing Julian's strategic brilliance and technical mastery, promoted him to chief methodology officer with a substantial compensation package. Julian had defended his work and his career not through quiet compliance, but through the decisive application of the law. He had demonstrated that while ambition could steal ideas, it could never replicate the depth of expertise that created them. If you enjoyed this story of workplace justice, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Have you ever caught someone trying to take credit for your work? Share your experience in the comments below. I'd love to hear how you handled it. And if you want more stories of satisfying professional revenge, hit that notification bell so you won't miss the next one. The victory was complete, and as Julian walked out of the Meridian Hotel into the crisp afternoon air, he knew that his dedication to the truth and the protection of his intellectual creations had secured his future in the industry. He felt the tension leave his body as he realized that engineering a legal defense was much like engineering a bridge. Both required foundation and structural integrity. He had not only protected his position, but had also established a precedent for intellectual property rights within the firm, showing that technical innovation and legal diligence were the ultimate keys to long-term success.